submarines, divers, and a box of secrets. To make a listening device breathe on the seabed, they had to unlearn what submarines were for. USS Halibut wasn't sleek anymore. She was a workshop with a keel. The missile bay became a garage for tools that didn't exist on any drawings, towfish that could smell current, sleds that could skim the bottom without raising a silt flag, anchors that paid out like a whisper instead of a clank. Noise discipline turned into a religion. Coffee mugs wrapped in tape. Wrenches cradled, not dropped. The boat was a bell jar with a heartbeat, and everyone learned to keep theirs quiet. The problem started with physics. Voices riding copper don't sound like anything unless you get close enough to feel the electric bleed. Microphones were useless. You needed coils tuned to the seep of current, a clamp that wrapped around a cable without breaking it, kissed the insulation gently, and drank the signal through induction. Engineers built that cuff like a jeweler builds a watch. No edges to echo, no bolt that could chatter. Every curve mattered, because at 400 feet, a millimeter of slop becomes a shout. Inside the clamp, a recorder waited. Batteries that didn't mind the cold, tape that wouldn't warp under pressure. Power profiles shaved down until the thing could hibernate for months and wake up every time a battleship yeoman asked for bearings or a base commander pushed a drill across a calendar. The lab ran it through hell, salt fog, freeze-thaw cycles, pressure tanks that groaned, and then ran it again. If the pod failed, you didn't get a second try. You got questions and a funeral. The human half was harder. Saturation divers don't commute to work, they live there. Halibut carried a steel apartment inside her hull, living chambers, a transfer lock, a hot water plant to feed umbilicals, a med bay just big enough for a decision. Mixed gas replaced air. Decompression happened once, at the end. That's the only way to do long shifts without turning bones to chalk. Training took away comfort 1 sense at a time. Divers learned to count tools by touch, to feel the difference between cable sheath and silt with gloved fingers, to slow their breath when panic tried to hammer through a regulator. Doctrine read like superstition, because superstition is just memory written short. Never cut, never surface, bag your trash. Brush your footprints back into the seabed. Fly the bottom on skids so thrusters don't write your name in mud. Approach with the current so your scent goes where you've been, not where you're going. If a patrol plane shows early or a trawler lingers wrong, scrub. Pods can wait, lives can't. Everything pointed at the clamp. Clear the cable without shaving insulation. Cradle it so weight didn't bruise the armor. Swing the pod like a midwife's hands, not a mechanic's. Tighten in sequence so a fastener didn't translate into a shock on the line. Then test the bite. A faint rise in a meter topside, a ghost of syllables beginning to separate from current hiss. Above, tech slid a notch filter they'd argued about for weeks across the band, carving away hums a cable shouldn't carry until the human band surfaced. Rough, smeared, unmistakable. Stealth extended past the pod. Camouflage had to read as geology to a bored Soviet camera, skins dusted with local grit, curves softened to barnacle logic. Latches were built for oven-mitt gloves, not bare fingers. Even the paint chemistry mattered. A bright scratch at depth is a flare. Divers rehearsed nestling the finished shape into a shallow scarp, reshaping silt by hand so no line shadow betrayed a recent touch. Before they left, they put back what they'd moved. Rocks weren't decorations, they were alibis. Topside, arguments never stopped. Early reels filled too quickly. Engineers squeezed months out of weeks with power discipline and better tape. Halibut's success begat Parch's purpose. Special mission boats arrived with bigger chambers, cleaner locks, anchor handling that sounded like prayer. The towed camera arrays learned to see without being noticed. Lower, slower, quieter, until the fish at the end of a cable could pass for a shadow that liked its job. None of it mattered if the ocean tattled, so the crew treated sound like light. A helmsman learned the difference between a rudder nudge and a whisper. A quartermaster measured anchor strain with 2 fingers on a frame. An engineer stroked a valve as if it could remember. That rhythm bled into the lock. The final checklist became a liturgy. Seals touched, tools named twice, umbilicals counted with a thumb on each braid. Panic was an intruder you barred with ritual. Then came work. The lock flooded. 2 figures dropped into dark that tasted like batteries and old coins. Lamps carved a coin-sized world. The cable lay where logic said it would, a shallow U in a gentle slope, growth soft, stubborn. A glove brushed until dull armor showed. A helmet pressed down to feel the low thrum of life. A single click on a throat mic told the boat what words would wreck. The clamps swung. Fasteners found home. Silence stretched thin as tape. And in a red-lit space inside a steel hull, a needle twitched. Human syllables rose out of noise. The recorder turned. No one cheered. Joy can be loud. When they left nothing. Silt brushed back. Pebbles returned to nests. A path unwalked. Back in the chamber, heat stabbed waking fingers like nettles. Someone made the same ugly joke he'd make every time. Someone else put a hand on a shoulder and squeezed once. The boat breathed again. The pod breathed below. And a box of secrets started filling because a handful of people had taught steel how to be kind. The first wire, finding and tapping the trunk. Navigation started in the dark, not just the water but the map. The sketch was a logic problem, Petropavlovsk to Vladivostok by the shortest sensible path, bent by bathymetry and the tastes of Soviet cable layers who liked shelf edges and gentle slopes. Halibut settled onto her skids like a patient animal. Inside, breath came through teeth. Fingers stroked valves with 2 instead of 5. A towed fish paid out aft. A metal minnow tuned to the faint electromagnetic bleed a living cable throws when copper carries voices. They drew the seabed like detectives draw a room. First pass, silence, only the boat's own heartbeat. Second, a tickle that died with a swell. Third, a steadier rise as if a whisper cleared its throat. No one cheered. Ballast was trimmed. The hull breathed to let the sensor read water, not nerves. The squiggle held. A cursor blinked on a scope that only existed topside. Below, the lock began to fill. Cold, even warmed by hot water, finds knuckles first. The divers slid out, and the world shrank to an oval of lamp, and the tether's gentle tug that meant home. False promises lay everywhere. Lost nets, chain junk that felt manufactured until a glove told on it. A hand hovered, then brushed, then pressed. Natural curves give. Man-made straightness resists. Under marine growth, a long shallow you lay in a scarp exactly where a practical cableman would have put it. The diver pressed his helmet to sheath and felt, more than heard, a low thrum. Life. One click on the throat mic. Topsides answered with a breath they didn't know they'd been holding. Procedure moved from memory to muscle. Clear a span without nicking insulation. Cradle the weight so stress didn't bruise armor. Swing the pod like a midwife's hands, not a mechanic's swing. The clamp's mouth opened like a book. Any book can dog ear if you rush. They didn't. Fasteners tightened in sequence so no talk translated into a sting on the line. A pause for silt to settle. A second talk. The cuff accepted its host. Up the umbilical, the recorder woke into noise. Current hiss, farm machinery, a ghost of the hull. The tech slid a notch filter he and a colleague had fought about for a month. The junk peeled away in layers. A shape surfaced, syllables smeared by copper but undeniably human. Then another voice higher, stepping on the first. A tape turned. Nobody smiled big. Joy can be loud. Hygiene mattered as much as attachment. The divers dusted back the growth like covering footprints in snow. They nestled the pod into a shallow fold, so a camera glance would call it geology. A tether brushed a stanchion on the way out and went taut. A hand went to a knife on reflex. The tender felt the snag song up the line and played slack through with a finesse you can't teach. Panic is loud. Patience is quiet. The lock clanged shut. Pressure climbed toward the chamber's routine brutality, and someone made the same ugly joke he always made. Heat stabbed pins and needles awake. A hand found a shoulder. That was the ceremony. Steel had learned to be kind. The pod had learned to listen. The boat remembered how to breathe. Days later, in a vault with fluorescent hums and a clock that no one trusted, the first reels spilled ordinary life. Bearings, paint, a tug's complaint. Then, like the first crisp line in a fog sketch, a patrol schedule. Hull names, departure windows. Aboard duty officers yawned between times. Analysts didn't clap. They set pencils down and looked at each other. The value wasn't drama, it was rhythm. Organizations betray themselves in repetition. The cable turned posture into appointment. Cross-checks hardened truth. A pier that went quiet on tape turned up empty in a satellite pass. A nickname for a cantankerous pump matched an acoustic hiccup the P3 crews had cursed for months. A Commodore's clipped vowels became mainline authority on a wall chart no outsider would ever see. In one room, a petty argument about a truck tire's delivery earned a yellow underline. Logistics hiccups ripple into sorty timing. In another, a translator wrote, "Throat clear equals bad news," next to a voice print she'd built from boredom. Risk shifted with the success. Retrievals moved from theory to calendar. The recorder's drumbeat, fill, swap, vanish, set windows that fit inside Soviet patrol arcs the tape itself described. Procedures tightened. An anchor paid out one link earlier to avoid a new rattle someone thought they heard. A gloved hand shaved 2 seconds off a latch because 2 seconds multiplied by dives multiplied by months becomes noise fewer times. Word didn't broaden, it narrowed. Compartment doors closed like eyelids. The well stays sweet if only a few drink. Even inside, people spoke in code so bland it sounded like weather. And yet the effect outside those rooms was sharp. A submarine commander tracing a route through the Kurils felt, for the first time, like he wasn't guessing. He wasn't cheating. He was reading. That was the first wise gift. It turned a locked room into a window and taught the people in the dark how to see without being seen. Pillar IV, the windfall, what the wire told America. It started small. A quartermaster in Petropavlovsk grumbling about bearings, a tug asking for a tow line. Then the rhythm thickened, duty rosters, maintenance windows, pier assignments, and buried among the trivia, the sentences that mattered, sortie timings, patrol boxes, readiness states. The cable carried the fleet's pulse in plain language, and the tape turned it into a metronome America could hear. In sealed rooms, analysts built pictures from voices. A Commodore's clipped vowels became mainline authority. A staff officer's habit of repeating key words flagged priority traffic. A logistics chief cleared his throat before bad news. Unencrypted language flattened delay. No ciphers to break. No keys to guess. Just the grammar of everyday work. Who asked whom how urgency actually sounded when a sigh meant a deadline slipped. From those habits came a map. A Delta class due Thursday announced itself Monday with a spare SEAL's request. A Yankee skipped a maintenance day, and a watch chief joked he'd sleep under the reactor if parts didn't arrive. Jokes aren't jokes in analysis, they're arrows. Schedules lined up against overhead imagery, wakes matched orders. A pier that went quiet on tape showed up empty from space. Confidence didn't grow from a single perfect intercept. It grew from the rhythm across hundreds. Tactically, the water changed. American skippers threaded the Kurils with timing tuned to Soviet ASW rotations they'd heard, not guessed. A commander later admitted he felt like he'd been driving without headlights for a decade. The tap, he said, was like dawn. He never said it loud. You don't brag about light. P3 crews stopped carpeting basins with sonarbys. The cable taught them where the chase would begin before wheels left tarmac. Patrol aircraft slid into lanes on the clock, saving fuel, shrinking search boxes from counties to neighborhoods. ASW was always part skill, part patience. Now it was part appointment. Strategically, the windfall reached further. Voices held doctrine made casual. How often commanders rehearsed quiet alerts. How logistics slowed when political leaders traveled. How training orders spiked after foreign port visits. You can read a force posture in how it complains. Readiness estimates that used to die on Fridays stayed alive through Sundays because the tape kept speaking in between. Briefers walked into rooms steadier. Negotiators did too. Knowing beats modeling when the stakes are nuclear. Encryption wasn't uniform. Whole stretches went naked, local loops and temporary circuits that never got temporary keys. When a scramble lamp lit on a Soviet desk, the tap heard line noise. But even noise had value. Timing is data. Who uses protection and when tells you where hurt lives. A burst of scramble at an odd hour warned of an exercise, or not an exercise at all. Compartmentation tightened. Very few saw raw tape. Fewer still saw timing married to hull numbers. Inside vaults, people spoke in code so bland it sounded like weather. A logistics officer walking past the wrong door would think the unit behind it handled maps. That wasn't paranoia. It was hydration. The well stays sweet if only a few drink. Translators wrote glossaries with human edges. Copy too fast meant no. Understood dragged meant trouble. A duty officer laughed before he lied. Pattern recognition drifted from signals into character studies. In war colleges, they teach order of battle like chess. On these reels, it sounded like office life. Messy, repetitive, revealing. Edges spilled outward. Acoustic libraries sharpened because schedules gave certainty. When you know exactly which hull leaves which pier on which tide, the engine's signature you record has a name. Passive arrays got smarter. Torpedo models fed better assumptions. Even satellite tasking refined. A glint on a pier means more when the cable said the pier would be empty 2 hours ago. Arms control briefers changed tone. They stopped selling estimates and started holding lines. Negotiating from hearing, not hoping, isn't swagger, it's posture. You don't gloat, you wait, you let silence work. None of it made the ocean safe. Storms still punched, mistakes still killed, but risk shifted from gambling to accounting. The cable didn't whisper secrets like a spy novel. It recited them like a ledger. America didn't just listen. It learned when to wait, when to move, and when to act like it knew nothing at all. That last lesson mattered most. The only victory that lasts is the one nobody can point at. The tape taught that, day after ordinary day. Scaling the trap, from one cable to a network. Success didn't shout, it whispered, and the whisper said, do it again. Once the first pod proved quiet and the reels came back humming with lives, the question inside vaults and wardrooms wasn't if they'd try again. It was how many times and where. Okhotsk had taught the grammar. Now came the sentences. Halibut showed the method. Parch turned it into muscle. Back at the yards, welders carved new spaces into old hulls, bigger saturation complexes, cleaner locks, anchor fairleads that paid out chain like a prayer. Noise discipline, already a creed, hardened into habit. A mug clink was a reprimand. A loose wrench was an omen. Boats evolved from hunters to surgeons. Arrive, settle, touch, and leave without a scar. The pod grew up too. Early cans held weeks. New barrels held seasons. Engineers shaved power until a recorder could winter over without begging for batteries. Camouflage matured from clever paint to skins dusted with local grit, molds whose edges read as geology to a bored Soviet camera. Latches accepted oven-mitt gloves. Fasteners tightened by feel alone. The goal stayed the same. Present as rock, remember as tape. The geography widened carefully. Okhotsk wasn't the only courtyard. North of Norway, the Barents tied fleet to Kremlin through lines the Soviets treated like law. In the Eastern Med, military trunks shadowed commercial routes along shelves no fisherman loved. No one used the phrase global network out loud. They spoke in targets and windows, but the logic repeated. Necessity draws copper the way gravity draws water. Follow what must be true. Scaling demanded a new religion, logistics. Retrieval cycles staggered so no two boats risked converging in the same box. Service windows tucked neatly inside Soviet patrol arcs the tape itself described. Ashore, spare pods were built in pairs, then fours, then eights, each tuned to a cable's peculiar impedance remembered from first bite. Divers drilled on scrap lengths that mimicked Soviet manufacture, armors that sprang back like stubborn wire, sheaths that fooled your palm until you learned their temperature through gloves. Seconds saved became noise avoided. Analysis scaled without flooding. New feeds didn't drown desks. They flowed through filters refined by the first wire. Voice biometrics got teeth because there were finally enough samples to teach machines what a throat clear meant in Kamchatka and a clipped copy meant in Vladivostok. Fusion cells stitched cable traffic to passes from space, to blips at the edge of towed arrays, to human fragments carried in from cold parking lots. A tug request on Tuesday in the Pacific could light a confidence score on a Thursday Barents estimate. Truth hardened at the joints. Risk rose invisibly. Every new ear was another chance for a Soviet diver's lamp to stick on a shape that didn't belong. The counter wasn't bravado, it was humility. Treat every site like it would be the first one found. Evidence hygiene bordered on compulsion. Divers carried mesh bags for the silt they disturbed, returned rocks to nests, brushed their own footprints out of mud. Topsiders audited what came back, flecks of barnacle, grains of grit. If the pod looked a shade too new, camouflage got another hour. Pride waited outside the hatch. Patterns learned at one site tuned choices at the next. A clamp profile that vanished at 400 feet in Okhotsk cast the wrong shadow at 200 in the Med. Redesign followed. A latch that sang in Barents swell got a felt sleeve. Even the way an anchor took strain became local.